Hi, this is Ryan Dawson of the Anti-Neocon Report. Joining me today is repeat guest. You may know her by her nickname Syrian Girl or her other nickname Mimi Al-Laham. Are you going by Marin yet, or do you have to keep your nicknames because so many people know them? Do you use your real name now, or do you have to just stick with
Um,
your well-known
when
nicknames?
I write, I use my real name. When I just answer to people, I just use the name that they know me by, just because it's more convenient and also it's just safer that way. But eventually, I hope to move into my real name.
I knew your real name for a long time and sat on it until he came out with it.
You knew it first. First hit Ryan.
I think, yeah, well, thank you. I mean, besides, I knew it first of people like online. Of course, people know you, but um, yeah, when I'm talking about your work, sometimes I have to go, Syrian Girl or Mimi, and oh yeah, her. So
I think the Syrian Girl is the most well known.
yeah,
You
mm, it depends. It depends on the circle of people, but mine's easy because my other name is just Rye. So people go, "Oh, Rye from Anthony Neocons," like, "Oh, Ryan's not a big deal." Some people, because when I started writing books, people found out my last name, so whatever. But anyway, I want to talk to you today about a video you made, the latest anti-Syrian propaganda. They'd say propaganda against the regime, but I don't say regime because that itself is propaganda. Is this starvation propaganda? And a couple writers wrote about it, and you wrote about it, but you were the only person to make an actual video about it, which I think was much more powerful. And well, I'll let you tell it. What is this new starvation propaganda that they blame completely on Assad and his evil regime?
well, the propaganda isn't that whether or not people are under siege. Yes, people are under siege. People are, going hungry without food. But the media portrays the entire picture as really one-sided. They only discuss one town that's under siege, but they don't discuss the other two towns that are under siege by the rebels, the moderate Al-Qaeda rebels. And they don't discuss a lot of
Moderate
other.
Al Qaeda.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, the moderate Al Qaeda. And they don't discuss a lot of other facts at all. They don't really beat it to their population. Number one, these starvation siege tactics happen in all wars, and they've been happening throughout the Syrian war for a long time. The rebels have done it to, hundreds of thousands of people in Aleppo, left them without water for 12 months, more over a year without water, and the media still didn't say anything about it. But when it came to specifically this town in Madaya that was under siege, because recently, a few months prior, one of Al Qaeda's factions, Ahrar al Sham and Jabhat al Nusra, had gone into the town because they had lost a town that was bordering nearby. So that this town called Madaya is near the Syrian-Lebanese border, and a lot of arms and insurgents and Al Qaeda members are using that route to smuggle and to let their troops in. And it just so happens that the people in this poor town were in the way of that, and Al Qaeda basically infested the town, and the Syrian military is surrounding it and preventing arms from coming in. And the reason that the media concentrated on this town is because of its importance in terms of the Lebanese border, and because they wanted to help Al Qaeda to maintain control of the town. And nothing in the media was talking about the fact that the same group that went into that town is also carrying out a siege against two much bigger towns near Aleppo in the north of the country. Their names are Fua and Kafraya. So that is what I was trying to talk about in the video. And other than that, people are going hungry, but the extent of which that was happening was exaggerated to the extreme through the use of images that came from not that city, but from either not being in Syria at all or from previous years in different cities. And all of those images were culminated and they were talking about 40,000 people starving. If you look up Wikipedia, there wasn't even 40,000 people in Madaya, there's only 9,000 people. And
That's a
they talked about,
significant difference, 40,000 to 9,000.
yeah, I mean, they talked about the UN, uh, sorry, they talked about the Doctors Without Borders saying that 27 people have died of starvation. But Doctors Without Borders isn't even in the town. And the reports that they got that number from were from the rebels, the moderate Al-Qaeda rebels themselves.
Well, they have a
So,
very, very bad reputation on reporting the news too, and these people just swallow it. And every single time, there's a litany of lies. We could probably list them if we had a few hours, where they'll say something and the press will just run with it without verifying any of it. And this is just the latest run. And another thing they neglected to mention, which you did point out in your video, was that the aid the government actually sent in food to these towns was intercepted by rebels who were then selling the food at exuberant prices to the populace.
that's exactly right. And many of the residents were talking about this. And many of the residents said that we just want these rebels to leave. We want them to get out. That would solve the entire problem because they are linked to Al Qaeda. But the
They're more
hilarity of
than
it,
linked
and
to Al Qaeda too. I want to point something out about Al-Laham because ISIS gets the most news. Al-Nusra Front gets the second most news. Wouldn't you agree? As like the worst too.
yes,
Now, Al-Sham is directly Al-Qaeda, like 9/11 Al-Qaeda, because in 2003 they had a prisoner swap where they got Mohammed Zamar out of jail, who was the money handler for Mohammed Atta, the ringleader for 9/11. They got him out of prison, and the U.S. still continued to send them money and aid under the umbrella of the FSA, and of course Toyota trucks, which are now outfitted with machine guns.
well, just back to the Doctors Without Borders saying 27 people were killed. The United Nations said one person. So there's this discrepancy in numbers there. And then when the United Nations brought aid into the city in terms of food, and people were interviewed in that city. Before the aid came in, some reporters snuck into the city and interviewed people with hidden cameras, and a lot of them were saying that the rebels were taking the aid that was coming into the city that was meant to be dealt between them and selling it for exorbitant prices, as you said. Now, when the aid came in with the Red Cross and the UN, RT was also on the scene and they filmed the hundreds of women and children that were being evacuated and civilians that were being evacuated and interviewed them and talked to them. And they also said the same thing, that the rebels were going to take that aid and they were going to sell it back to the people. And so journalists, like I forget his name, but everybody calls him Jihadi Julian. He's some German journalist on Twitter.
Oh, from Blid?
And yeah, well, and a group called
I
Build
got into
as
it with him.
well. Oh yes, you know the one.
Yeah.
Maybe you can show it like a screenshot of who he is. And a group called Build.
He's not even there and doesn't have any people there either.
Yeah, he's just a fanboy. So, and this group called Build said that the UN and the Red Cross and this journalist who interviewed all these people were lying and were in on this conspiracy where 300 people, civilians, were airlifted from a pro-government town and brought into this war zone town, Madaya, just to rig those interviews. So that's
actors.
that's
They're all actors.
yeah. And some BBC
Maybe he's
journalist
related to Jim Fetzer.
copied this story. Well, it just shows you that what they really want to do, it doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that the Syrian people are suffering in general. It doesn't have to do with the fact that the Madaya people are going without food, or the people in Fua or Kafria are going without food. All that they care about is getting support to the insurrection, to Al Qaeda, to help it destroy the country further. That's all they really cared about. Because if they cared about, anything else other than that, they wouldn't just be calling for the end of the siege in Madaya. They would be calling to the end of all sieges and the removal of Al Qaeda from those towns, and for the end of the sanctions on Syria, which is basically a siege over the whole country.
Well, these same people are cheerleading while Saudi Arabia actually is starving people in Yemen. I mean, you're talking about 6 million who need emergency food assistance, and Oxfam and groups like that, legit groups, have gone in with these numbers, and these papers either ignore them or worse, they actually cheerlead the Wahhabis again when they're actually starving people in Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East. And they've
Well, I've
been
seen
lying
the
about
pictures from
Syria since
Yemen.
day one.
I've seen the pictures from Yemen, and it's reminiscent of, the African kids that you saw during the civil war in Sierra Leone.
Hmm.
That's the level of starvation that's happening there. And um, when you look at the Twitter feed of Human Rights Watch, the CEO by the name of Kenneth Roth, the war crimes in Yemen he's blaming on the Houthis, not Saudi Arabia. It just boggles the mind. Like, these are the people who are supposed to be humanitarian, but they're just exploiting humanitarianism to obscure what's really happening on the ground, which is that NATO and GCC allies are basically destroying two countries in the Middle East, Syria and Yemen.
Now, I think you would agree with me that the goal in Syria is not to oust Bashir al-Assad, but to destabilize and break Syria. You see this balancing act where they keep the conflict level, that no side ever wins, because that destroys Syria. That's the real goal.
I think that if they were to remove Bashar al-Assad, it would actually expedite the destruction and the perpetual war. I think that the breakdown of the state and the dismantlement of the army would pave the way to balkanization and hence a perpetual war with which you speak. But I do agree that what they say is they're fighting towards a stalemate. They've said that so themselves. They're fighting for a stalemate and a perpetual war. I completely agree with that. But on the other hand, I think that the removal of Assad would actually prolong the war. It wouldn't cut it short.
I think it would prolong the war, like you said, but I think in that scenario with a prolonged war, you're going to end up with like a second Saudi Arabia, which nobody wants. I mean, not even the Israelis, nobody wants ISIS in charge of the state.
I don't think it would necessarily, because the Syrian people wouldn't stomach such a thing. So I think for sure it will lead to like a perpetual war.
Well, the Syrian people would get butchered, is what would happen.
Yeah,
It's well, they are getting butchered. I mean, it's just disgusting, and it's from U.S. weapons and money. They're driving around with trucks from the United States. They have arms from the United States. And the constant lie is, oh no, we're sending all this aid to the moderate rebels. What moderate rebels? The only moderates in Syria are the government. There
wasn't it
aren't
the
any factions that
Pentagon
are moderate. How do you moderately cut someone's head off?
with a blunt knife?
I did
I
it
don't
quickly.
shouldn't joke about that, but wasn't it the Pentagon that said that the moderate rebels they were trying to fund, the lot of which actually defected to ISIS?
Yeah, I would. They didn't even defect. They are ISIS and always have been. I mean, that's plausible deniability. Say, oh well, we gave them to these guys and they sold them to ISIS. The FSA was ISIS. I mean,
The
it's
thing
the
that
same
frustrates
people.
me is how everything is about ISIS and everybody forgot about Al Qaeda.
Yeah,
You know,
well, I
like
mean, they have
why
overlapping
Russia
membership.
isn't fighting ISIS, they're fighting the rebels, which are Al Qaeda. But
And
the US never talks about fighting Al Qaeda anymore. If you've noticed, the media has just totally forgotten about that war.
isn't that something? Wouldn't that be enemy number one? After the September 11th story, anyway, you want to fight Al Qaeda, but the U.S. was funding Al Qaeda before 9/11 with the Mujahideen and Al-Laham, and now afterwards. They're aiding Al Qaeda. They did it in Libya too. I look at Libya now. It's run by warlords. Great job.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Do you want to mention some of the journalists that wrote about it and some examples of the pictures you found? Like it was from this and they said it was from that.
Offhand, I can remember Paul Antonopoulos. He did write about it. He writes for Al Masdar News.
So from your video offhand, I know they faked a lot of pictures of starving people. Are there any in particular that you could mention off the top of your head to put you on the spot?
Well, there's this one that comes to mind that Al Jazeera used, an image of an old man who hungry and quite bony on the street, and it turns out that he wasn't even Syrian. He was some homeless man from the US or Europe. And another one that comes to mind is a girl that actually has been used twice. Her name is Mariana Mazze, and she's from Lebanon. The first time that somebody stole her picture off Facebook, and she's a very cute girl. And the first time they used her image, they claimed that she was a Syrian refugee selling gum on the streets of Lebanon. And this caused outrage. Like, this poor little girl, what has become of us all? And she's selling gum on the street, and they called her
I
Syrian
saw in
police.
the Moroccan news they said she was eating cardboard.
Yeah, well, that's 2 years after the first time her image was exploited. The first time it was exploited, I believe, was in 2014 when they were saying she was selling gum on the street. Now, even after that was exposed as a lie, 2 years later they use her face again and say that she's starving in Madaya. She's not doesn't even come from Madaya. And they're collecting donations using her face. But it just goes to show you this. There have been two examples of many, many, many examples, and it shows you how the media can just suddenly cause a huge hype and hysteria and exaggerate a story when there really is a story. I mean, these sieges are happening on both sides, but the extent at which it's happening, specifically in Madaya, is not to the extent that they're trying to explain.
There are
And
a lot of
they're
people,
totally ignoring the fact that Al Qaeda has taken over the town as well.
a lot
And
of
that
people
it's
bet on that
basically
propaganda.
selling it to people at a high price.
I saw Rula Jabrel, who's a Palestinian activist, tweeting this nonsense about Assad starving his own people, and the narrative sort of like, oh, well, ISIS and all of them are bad, but the government's bad too, and we got to support some mythical moderate army or whatever. And it's amazing to me. I mean, the same people who they understand how the lies about the Iraq War, they understand the lies about the invading Libya, and then it gets to Syria, and they think, oh no, that's exactly what the television told me. And yet, where were all these people the first 10 years that Assad was president, from 2000 to December of 2010, almost 11 years? Not a word mentioned about what a monster he was or anything. Nobody was starving. Nobody was getting their heads cut off or anything like that. Uh, they'll talk about his father and stuff, but no, they just skipped that whole decade. I mean, Assad was calling for our nuclear-free Middle East. Of course, the only country with nukes in the Middle East is Israel. And they've never attacked ISIS. They've exclusively only attacked Assad. All this just gets ignored, and it just baffles me. I'm like, there's no motive for the government to starve their own people. I mean, the only reason they have been able to survive is because they have the support of the people, clearly. If they didn't have support
Well,
from the people, they would have been over in a couple of weeks.
those people who are the Palestinian activists who are saying that completely ignore the fact that the moderate rebels that they're talking about had a huge siege on Aleppo where they forbade people from bringing food formula for babies to cross to the government side of Aleppo. So, it's complete hypocritical crap. And basically, I think the mentality that causes them to know what's going on in the Iraq war, but to be totally stupid about what's going on in Syria, is the idea that they always have to support the underdog, that the good guy is always the weakest one. And because the government is stronger than the Al-Qaeda terrorists that the US is funding, automatically that must mean that the Al-Qaeda terrorists are the good guys.
I think part
But
of it
that's not
too is that George Bush invaded Iraq, and this is Obama, and they're liberal, and
Oh
so
yeah,
he's
true.
good, and Bush was bad. So they can see
It's
it
a
when they.
liberal one.
I think it's what you said too. I think that they have that mythos, especially because of the American Revolution. It was the Americans rebelling against the British, and so it was the rebels versus the tyrants, the Star Wars narrative. And it can't possibly be that the sovereign state is in the right. It's got to be the rebels who are right, even when they're cutting
Yeah,
off heads and killing babies and everything else. So that's part of the American mythos, but I think a lot of it's just Democrat Republican bullshit.
I think it's true. I think a lot of it is the fact that Obama's doing it. And Obama, at the beginning of his term, I don't know who spread this rumor that he was a Muslim, but it gained him a lot of support in the Muslim world.
I know.
People were like, well, he's a secret Muslim. That must mean that he's going to stop killing Muslims.
He's killed
So,
more Muslims than any president.
yeah,
I mean,
but I don't know whether that rumor is true or false or whoever came up with it. Maybe Obama himself
Obama's a Zionist, and he
helped
has
in
been his
the
whole career.
yeah.
Like, he
Well,
never
it's the
said he
same.
was anti-war. The people just put that on him because they wanted him to be the opposite of Bush, but his Senate record clearly showed that he was a warmongering Zionist pig. And, he tripled the size of the war in Afghanistan. He invaded Libya, Somalia, drone strikes in Pakistan and Yemen. He's been a monster the whole time, but there's still people who think he's a secret Muslim and he has no birth certificate, and that's what they criticize him about. He's not aiding Al Qaeda, you know, aiding Saudi
Well,
Arabia.
but the people who believe, I think that the Middle Easterners have gradually forgotten this. Some of them, they would say, he's. Oh, okay. I remember now. You know the guy the crazy guy that hijacked the chocolate cafe in Sydney. He like got all those hostages. On his Twitter account, he
Very
was
good
tweeting about
chocolate, just
very good.
saying.
It's not bad.
For
Yeah.
truffles, for the price. That's good.
For the price. But you should try Sprungly. It's better.
You should try
Uh,
Hokkaido, Royce.
yeah, I have.
That's good stuff.
It's fantastic. I've been to the factory.
Well, next time you're in Japan, we'll get some. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go.
Biscuits, those biscuits.
Hmm.
But
That's cookies for
anyways,
all of you who speak real English.
well, this guy, the terrorist who held up the chocolate cafe in Sydney, had a Twitter account, and he was tweeting about Syria. And one of the things he tweeted is, Obama, you should like stop hiding the fact that you're Muslim because it's a sin. Just to show
I'm
you how
thinking that if we're
basic
gonna
this
send
is.
food, we should just send all pork products because ISIS won't touch any of that. I'd be crop dusting
No,
them with
well,
pig's blood.
no, but that wouldn't work because many Syrians wouldn't touch any of it either,
If you're hungry, you'll eat
including
it.
myself. If I'm hungry, yeah, I guess if you're
You're
hungry, you'll
starving,
eat.
you'll eat the damn bacon. And once you've had it, you won't
No, I
forget.
mean, I, the thing that frustrates me is they had this video of this very fat rebel who slaughtered a cat, for just for propaganda purposes. He wasn't starving in any way, but he grabbed the street cat and he slaughtered it, and and so this just to tell the story. And of course, cats are not one of the animals that you're allowed to eat
Yeah,
in
just
Islam,
about anywhere. Yeah.
except if you're starving.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So your pork story scenario might not work because ISIS might say, "Oh well, if we're starving, we'll eat it anyway," because it's not like Like there's a rational line for that rule in the Quran itself. It's not like
I'm not
you do
sure how
it
sincere some of these
or
guys
else.
are
Yeah,
about religion anyway. A lot of them are just
that's right.
mercenaries, you know. I mean, some of them are Muslim mercenaries, but a lot of them just want the money.
I think that some of them are just in it for the power as well, because a lot of the people that join up are from the ghettos of Sydney, who have tried to get out of their situation by selling drugs on the street, and in failing that, they've gone and joined ISIS.
Yeah, here's a
And I'm
gang, and you
serious,
can
it's the
rape
same thing.
people and kill people. It's great for
Yeah,
them.
and everyone will respect you. You'll be a gangster in, someone else's country. That's the truth.
Yeah, that it's the scum of the earth that join both armies. You get
Yeah,
all this honor and respect to go, murder people you never met, which I just think's insane.
like little Napoleons everywhere.
Yeah,
They're,
at least Napoleon was clever. Is they're nothing. I mean, they're pawns, cannon fodder, and they're fighting for Zionist interests, and they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, they're totally tools. They have absolutely no awareness of it. It's crazy.
Well, I hope you and I can work on a Syrian film in the future where we can just sort of debunk each lie, starting with the Dara shootings to through sarin gas, etc., because I think it's definitely needed. And I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I do think it would be really cool to make a documentary about what's happening, and about what's happened as well with the chemical weapon story, with the pipelines, and you'd be very well
Yeah,
researched
the
about that
pipelines.
because you were one of the first people that did a video about that in 2012.
I think
But
I was the
I just
only
want to
person.
say, because when you expose things like this, automatically people are going to say you're inhuman. You don't care about humanity. But
Well,
as a matter of fact, I care both about truth and humanity, and the suffering of the Syrian people, and these people who are exploiting emotions of good people are concealing the facts from them, and concealing the fact that the country is being destroyed by Al Qaeda, and
I'm
that's
sure
on.
people say, well, you're Syrian, so you side with the Syrians, but you were saying all the same things when Iraq was getting invaded.
Of
Yeah, so was
course.
I. I didn't have a stake in it. But,
No.
yeah, we're not anti-American or anything like that. It's just, look, it's this particular policies are full of deceptions, and they're not for national security interests, and they're definitely not fighting Al Qaeda. It's the exact opposite. And Bashir al-Assad is not a monster. I don't like government at all, not even his, but I'll definitely take that over, Wahhabi Salafist nuts and mercenaries. And they're clearly mercenaries. These are clearly foreign fighters with foreign support. It's unreal. This is not an organic rebellion, and I just don't know what you need to say to people to convince them, other than like a long timeline of it. Because we have to fight a lot of propaganda from television, and that's why I think we need to work on on a documentary.
I completely agree, and don't quote me on this because it's just something that I recently came across and I haven't actually watched the video. But apparently, John McCain, crazy McCain, said that people in closed rooms were talking about arming ISIS. Don't quote me on that, but look it up. I'll see if I can find out if it's true or not.
Well, I saw some
Apparently, he
Israeli
was on
spokesmen
video.
saying, given a choice between Iran and ISIS, we'll choose ISIS. And I thought, well,
Yeah,
you
did
already
you?
did. I mean,
Well, they are. Effectively, that's what they're doing and everything. That's their policy.
they're
That is
desperate
their
because the
policy.
sanctions are being lifted on Iran. Actually, they already started. They have been lifted. Some of them, their assets are not frozen anymore. Getting $100 billion, and then they're getting more billions in interest. And so Iran's looking pretty right now. And ISIS has lost half of its territory in Iraq. They're losing a lot of the cities they, somewhat controlled in Syria. They're losing. And a lot of it's been this air campaign from Russia, which did it for selfish interests to fight Chechen terrorists that have, linked up with ISIS. So what? Who cares? Uh, they're not going to last throughout the year. without some sort of massive push or support from their Western allies because they're getting their asses kicked right now.
Mhm.
So we'll see.
Well, I don't think we're finished with what they have in store for us yet, but we'll keep fighting. So thanks for having me on,
Yeah,
and hopefully
anytime.
we'll work together for something in the future.
Yeah, and share some chocolates. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. See you.
Bye.